and I want to cover everything. So we started the part of the study last week I called Child Worship, and I know I stirred a lot of things, and I'm going to stir a little more this morning, but all with the intent of helping and making some deposits to help us in a cultural movement, a cultural phenomenon. And we laid the groundwork of the biblical pattern and call for raising our children. I didn't quite finish that, but I'm going to just move on this morning. Our text was Deuteronomy 6:6-9. I would encourage you to be thoughtful of that, reread it, consider what it means to us as parents. But we have a serious cultural problem on hand when it comes to parenting today, and much of today's parenting is non-conducive to producing kids that will powerfully live for God, and furthermore, in some cases, it has become child worship. And so I want to dive into this. I'm going to be using quite a bit of references and articles, so just you're going to need to really tune in this morning, but everything has its point and purpose in what I'm going to say. So let me look then with you at the child-centered universe of today. We have what I call a child worship epidemic on hand today. And while the world, they don't know much better, in the church we have a biblical template and a generational example, which we should be deriving from. In many cases, though, because it conflicts with our philosophies, we kick to the curb. Foolishly, might I say. And you have to understand, we are now producing children that are going to one day bear children. Are they going to have the biblical template, the generational example, or are they going to simply carry on with maybe what they've been taught, if it isn't those? And so the question is, how have children become such an obsessive part of American culture where everything is centered around children beginning in our homes? Now, while I don't have time to give you the whole history of this, I can tell you that the greatest generation, the one that we've known as the greatest, the World War II generation, were one of the biggest problems in what we are facing today. They had suffered a Great Depression and a World War. They didn't want their children to suffer and gave excessive liberty and excessive pampering and produced what we know as the baby boomer generation, which if you have ever done any study and thoughtful research on that generation, it is what has caused all the disaster we have today in young adults, parenting, etc. And so that generation, that greatest generation, lost their intentional approach to raising their children. And these little gods are now running their homes, ruling the roost, getting their way as the parents refused to reject their passivity and mindless consumptions. They were not preparing their children to live a moral existence or have a lifelong respect for authority. And again, I can't go into the whole history of this for sake of time, but I've done excessive reading on this, and you can do your own reading to see what I'm talking about. But let's add to this now the jaw-dropping accumulation of wealth that is allowed, and even more so today allows, America's youth to indulge in more creature comforts than any generation ever before. We now have what has been coined the Peter Pan generation on our hands that just refuse to grow up. This is born out of a faulty parenting approach, a faulty parenting philosophy, and I'm going to go there this morning, child worship. So I'm going to begin by going through a number of articles to begin to present my point and hopefully stimulate thought here this morning. And we're going to begin with the first culprit, I mentioned him last week, but I'm going to read an article or two. How Dr. Spock Destroyed America. The root cause of decline in America is not that difficult to deduce. When a society becomes out of control, it's because its members elevate self-indulgence and lack self-control. It's really that simple. In the last 50 years, human nature has not changed. Selfishness, lust, covetousness, and all other passions are in the human heart at birth. It's only a trained proclivity to say no to our natural drives that keep our passions in check. Self-control is what stops us from stealing, murder, and committing adultery. It is parents who must instill this important quality in each generation. History and common sense teach us that society in which children are not taught to keep self-control of their passions is destined to moral disintegration, which is what we're seeing before our very eyes today. In America, the reason that baby boomers and their children have grown up with less mastery over their passions than previous generations is because in the late 40s, a new voice of authority on parenting rose to prominence. And the parents of the 50s and 60s began to raise children different than before. One of the contributors is Dr. Benjamin Spock. Wrote the book Common Sense, Book of Baby and Child Care. Don't get it. Instead of stressing the importance of teaching self-denial and respect for authority, Spock discouraged directive training and emphasized accommodating children's feelings and catering to their preference. Using Spock's approach, parents began to feed self-indulgence instead of instilling self-control. Homes were becoming more child-centered. As parents elevated children's freedom of expression and natural cravings, children then became more outspoken, which is where you get the lippy kid today that doesn't know how to respect authority. Defiant and demanding of gratification, in fact, they came to view gratification as a right. Spock wrote in his book in response to a cold authoritarian philosophy of parenting that had been dominant in America, which we don't, if you know that time frame, we don't think it was right. But for years, parents had been told to withhold affection from their children, not to touch them too often, not to respond to their tears. Children need our affection, understanding, and respect. However, Spock's solutions reflected total ignorance of the hedonistic bent of human nature and fostered an overexalted sense of self-importance in children. Homes became hotbeds for narcissism, entitlement, and victim thinking. So think about this. Produced a parenting philosophy that has been a major contributor to the decline at hand and the generational immaturity and breakdown that we're facing today. Somebody else weighs in on this topic in an article called An Overly Emotional Generation. Dr. Benjamin Spock told parents to allow kids to express themselves and build a strong self-esteem. Today, we have taken this approach to an extreme, and it has worked. These kids assuredly have developed a strong self-esteem. According to a nationwide high school survey, more than 8 out of 10 believe they are very important people. They feel entitled to special treatment as they enter the adult world. They know they are in the spotlight and all eyes are on them. Children over the past years have been overprotected yet underprepared for the harsh realities of life, and they have bought the lie that the end goal of men is to be happy. Okay, this is a parenting flaw that we're beginning to expose here and bring to the surface, and it begins to border on child idolatry. Okay, so bear with me as we go. So self-esteem, according to this article, is ruining your kids. As a child of the 70s, I grew up in the 80s where baby boomers were loving life, loving love, and loving themselves. This translates to every area of life, including their parenting. The seeds of self-esteem were laid by my parents' generation and have taken full root in my generation. It's the idea that kids need to have a positive outlook in life. They need to love themselves. While in limited ways this can be true, the pervasiveness of this idea is killing the collective conscience of our country and ruining our kids. My parents were not primarily concerned with my self-esteem, and I am thankful. But listen to where he goes, or she goes. No, it's he. Okay. I remember my mom saying something to me when I was younger that always stuck with me. She said that she and my father were not concerned with how our peers felt about us. They would always watch how adults interacted with us and would listen for the assessments adults had of us. Why? Because my parents were more concerned with our self-awareness than our self-esteem. How kids interact with adults is a great, yet not perfect, indicator of how self-aware your kids are. So many parents today are concerned with their kids having friends, their kids having the right kind of friends, their kids not getting their feelings hurt by their friends, because they want their kids to have good self-esteem because they love their kids. But they're doing their kids a disservice. Parents today take their kids' side over the word of another adult because they don't want to crush their kids. In doing this, they are eroding the very things that will make kids successful in life. I'm all for good self-esteem and smarts in school. But what makes you successful in life is self-awareness. And here is the truth. Parents so often totally miss that when you raise a kid who is self-aware, you get self-esteem thrown in. But if you try to raise a kid who's simply good self-esteem, you get neither. And so let me take issue for a moment with this whole topic of parents that take their kids' side over the word of an adult. Biggest mistake you could ever make in your life. It doesn't matter. The adult could be out of their minds. But you are instilling something, and here's the problem. I have watched it happen right under my eyes many of times right here. That an adult will get involved, have something to say, and a parent will foolishly, they'll have a debate in front of their kid against that adult or against that leader. I'll tell you, that is the most foolish thing you could ever do. But because we're going to pamper our little kids, and we're going to, I made this mistake when my oldest daughter was in 3rd grade. And I remember it. She came home, and, how can you deny a 3rd grade's tears of a little girl and the bad day she had at school and her 3rd grade teacher? And so I wrote her 3rd grade teacher a letter, but it had an accusatory.
We want to see Jesus lifted.
When I finally talked to the teacher eye to eye and face to face, and I never did it again. Anyway, that was my rant on that. But the self-esteem movement is alive and well today, even in the church. So another article, parents, stop idolizing your children. Idols come in many different shapes and forms. Some idols are made of wood, others are made of metal. But in Western culture, some idols are even made of flesh and blood, because in America, we're tempted to idolize our children. So here are 4 symptoms that he gives out of our hearts that idolize children. Symptom number 1, parents believe their children can do no wrong. Now let me say in this, I realize that many times we'll never actually, we will in some cases, but just say, oh, I know they can do wrong. But it's amazing when they do the wrong how we respond. But she says, our culture tempts us to believe that our children are all in a state of perfection. American parents may not say it outright, but we often act like our children are incapable of messing up, sinning, or doing wrong. When our children do wrong, we parents may try to shift the blame to another source. Oh, yeah. When we act and think this way, we insinuate that our children are sinless beings, and it really is amazing what happens when our kids get in trouble. I've noticed a lot of parents go into the minimalized consequence mode. Another humongous mistake, because our kid did get in trouble. It blew our little worldview up of our perfect little angel, and so we foolishly go into this minimalized consequence mode to protect our little gods and keep them from the consequences that they desperately need if they're going to make it out of this in the right direction. Symptom number 2, parents believe their children have ultimate authority. Children seem to run the show both inside and outside the home. Children that are worshipped as idols have absolute power. They determine what they want to do, what they do not want to do. They dictate schedules. And if they don't like a person that tries to hold them accountable, parents make sure the other person changes in order for the child to get their way. Symptom number 3, parents believe their relationship to their children is supreme. The idol worship of children means that children are the supreme relationship in the life of parents. This typically is observed as the best friend parent model. Parents who worship their children place children above growing in their relationship with God and with their spouse in order to be a best friend or a cool parent. What is a cool parent? Parents who idolize children make the relationship with the child their only focus in life. Symptom 4, parents believe they must sacrifice everything for their children. Idols always require some type of sacrifice to be appeased. Parents who idolize their children spend everything they earn plus some to generate materialistic happiness in their children. They will sacrifice all their time and energy to make their kids successful in some type of worldly pursuit like sports, music, or academics. No resources spared to elevate the success and happiness of their children. Parents who idolize their children are unable to say the word no. Instead, they sacrifice everything at the altar of their children. Now, I've been doing a personal study on the book of Hebrews. And, in this, you realize that the issue of the book of Hebrews was that the Jewish believers were going back to Judaism because of the persecution. But I found interesting in my studies, one of the discoveries was as these Jewish parents were going back to Judaism to escape the persecution, it wasn't purely out of self-preservation, but one of the leading factors was they didn't want their children to have to face persecution. Isn't that interesting? That their whole premise for backtracking and going back to which, if you remember in the book of Hebrews, he's talking about that if you go there, the possibilities of being restored again are small, little to none, because they had to write off Christianity to do this, right? And it's a very flawed parenting philosophy that we go out of our way to minimize hardship, difficulty for our children. Very flawed, and you will pay the price when they're older, I'm telling you. And don't bring to me the exception of that one because it's not the rule. So let me move on because I got to leave time for you. How American parenting is killing the American marriage. Sometime between when we were children and when we had children of our own, parenthood became a religion in America. As with many religions, complete unthinking devotion is required from its practitioners. Nothing in life is allowed to be more important than our children, and we must never speak a disloyal word. To understand the frightening power of parenthood religion, one need look no further than the 2005 essay in the New York Times by Ayelet Waldman, where the author explained that she loved her husband more than her 4 children. She went on the Oprah show, Where Are They Now? Was the name of it. The author recently on that show reaffirmed the sentiments reflected in her New York Times article, and she added that her outlook has had a positive impact on her children by giving them a sense of security in their parents' relationship. In other words, I put my husband or my wife ahead of my children. Following the publication of her essay, Waldman was not only shouted down by America for being a bad mother, strangers threatened her physically and told her they would report her to Child Protective Services. This is not how a civil society conducts open-minded discourse. This is how a religion persecutes a heretic. And so this whole new idealistic, child-centered world is exploding before our very eyes. Children who are raised to believe they are the center of the universe have a tough time when their special status erodes as they approach adulthood. Most troubling of all, couples who live entirely child-centric lives can lose touch with one another to the point where they have nothing left to say to one another when the kids leave home. In the 21st century, most Americans marry for love. We choose partners who we hope will be soulmates for life. When children come along, we believe that we can press the pause on the soulmate narrative because parenthood has become our new priority and religion. We raise our children as best we can, and we know that we have succeeded if they leave us going into the world to find partners, have children of their own. Once our gods have left us, we try to pick up the pieces of our long-neglected marriages and then find new purpose. Is it surprising that divorce rates are rising fastest for new empty nesters? Perhaps it's time that we gave the parent religion a second thought. Amen. I'm almost done with the reading, and then I'll make my practical impartation, which I'm sure you can't wait for. Okay, so if you worship your kids, there's a good chance you're ruining their life and yours. Can I let you in on a little secret? It's one of those things everybody used to know, but somewhere along the way it got lost. And now it seems fewer and fewer people know this. But it's no less true today than it ever was. The big secret is this: kids are not the center of the universe. In the past, I've written on the danger of becoming a narcissistic parent. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, and equally as dangerous, is falling into the trap of worshiping your kids and believing they are the center of the universe. Countless well-meaning parents fall victim to this idea that children are the center of the home and parents are simply there to serve them. So one prominent family advocate shares this: you think that we might have created a culture without intending to in which we've ended up worshiping our children? The assumption in so many families is that the child is the center of the home. The parents are there to serve the child and ensure his or her perpetual happiness. But this is neither healthy nor is it biblical. There's not one verse in Scripture commanding parents to make their kids happy or entertain them. We do see verses about training kids, Proverbs 22, loving kids, Titus 2, raising them in the discipline and instruction of God, Ephesians 6, encouraging them, Colossians 3, requiring obedience, Colossians 3, and imparting spiritual truth daily, Deuteronomy 6, which is our text. But nowhere is there one verse about making them happy, entertaining them, or even buying them anything that they want. Do any of these scenarios sound familiar to you? The parent who looked bewildered because their kids won't stop dancing on the table, or who have now broken Tonka truck number 8 this month. The parent often sighs something about being able to believe they have to buy another coffee table, their third, or another truck because their children are so active. No, they're not being disciplined correctly. Or this scenario, the parents who stay up late doing homework with or for their children and show up tired for work the next day. These parents rescue their kids mostly because they can't imagine their kids not doing well in school. Or this scenario, the kid who gets in trouble at school, but now that mom is going to be on the phone with the vice principal and Menace to find out why the teacher is making the day so difficult for her little son. Or this scenario, the dads who adore their daughters that they can't stand up to her, constantly compromising on consequences, spending, and boundaries in order to keep the peace. These situations are indicative of a home where kids are center and parents exist merely to serve. This will also be evident in the schedule. Listen to this. The schedules parents allow their kids to keep. Often parents talk about, I'm so busy, I have no time. But what they really mean is they are a shuttle service to their kids and don't have time to do anything else. Between soccer, ballet, scouts, school functions, trips to their friend's house, mom and dad end up doing little more than driving their kids all over town. What's the end result? First is a selfish kid. Kids that grow up as the center of the universe, believing that the world owes them something or should pay attention to them simply because they exist. Rather than being externally focused, seeking to help others, These kids are selfish and self-centered. Amen. And when these kids leave the home, they discover it takes hard work to earn respect in this world. And at times, the results are catastrophic. Can you say the 35-year-old living in mom's basement? Another result of this type of parenting is a lost relationship with your spouse. Because mom and dad are so focused on the kids and doing what the kids want and making the kids happy, they forget to continue to work on their own relationship. Then when the kids leave the house, two strangers look at each other wondering what to do next. No wonder the divorce rate among people married 25 to 35 years is skyrocketing. And that's a great little article right there. So let me interject some stuff here, because so many parents are assuring that their kids will have the latest and the greatest so that they don't have to face their peers without, peer pressure. Peer pressure is a good thing to make your kid have to face. My dad had this old, nasty, ugly-looking truck, and my mother would drop us off at school. Mom, just drop us off behind the school. No. She would drop us off right in front of the school. All of our friends would see us getting out of this nasty thing. My wife was worse. Her dad owns a roofing company. He had a dump truck. He would take her to school in the dump truck and on purpose drop her off and make it backfire so that everyone would look and she's getting out. Oh, but we don't want our kids to have to face that. And I submit to you again, and I'm just going to say this just because I have another opportunity, that the device problem we're having today among our church youth is parents that are not willing to make them do without and what everyone else has. My dad used to tell, I don't care, you're my kid, they're not my kid. I'm telling you what you can and can't have. They never let me go to the Van Halen concert. I desperately wanted to go to the Van Halen concert, but they didn't want me hanging around with that crowd. These were unsaved parents. But the device issue of today, parents that will not, because they don't want their kids to have to face being the ones without. And we convince ourselves, my child is different, your little God is different than their gods. And think about the years of youth, because they're so oriented around image, right? Image. What you wear, what you drive, where you live. And once a child reaches godlike status in the home, they're not denied anything that will hurt their little image among their peers. And once they reach godlike status, parents' lives now will revolve around their children, build our whole lives around their athletic experience. We become dedicated to assuring that our children excel among their peers just for the sake of having that status, not just because we're concerned with their future. We become what is coined the helicopter parents, hovering over our children, serving their every whim, whole life wrapped up in the kids. We've given them godlike status. Little article, they can't even why millennials are the anxious generation. 70 years ago, there was the greatest generation. Later, Generation X, known as the slacker generation. Today, millennials are turning out to be the anxious generation. Numerous recent studies have shown that millennials suffer from anxiety at a much higher rate than generations that preceded them. What's wrong with kids these days? A lot, actually. They're the first generation raised with internet, the first generation to experience helicopter parenting. They're at once constantly exposed to social media, but also permanently sheltered by overbearing parents following the new parent religion. So let me conclude before I open it. I'm doing good. Sacrificing our idols on the altar. So here we have in Genesis 22, we find Abraham offering his son Isaac on the altar before God. Here's the promised child. Here's the child of his old age. Here's the apple of his eye. The miracle child. The ultimate test was to offer him up as a living sacrifice before God in obedience to God, his child. This was the best thing that ever happened to Isaac, because it plays out in his life as he goes on and gets married, moves on, his dad dies. We see the fruit of it in his life as he went on in the will of God and was willing to sacrifice at the same level. Matter of fact, when he came to the wells his father dug, you know, all the things that parents want to just make sure we pad for we got to have it for our kids when they're older and for our grandkids. No, the wells were all stopped up. He dug his own wells. Best thing you could do is teach your kid to dig their own wells. Isaac learned this because of the moment that his father was willing to offer him up to God as an ultimate sacrifice, and God said, now I know you love me more. So the moment our child comes out of the womb, this is what child dedication is all about. We need to offer them to God and then proceed to live a life of obedience and assure that we are developing an obsession in our children for sacrifice and obedience. An obsession, not for all these other things. And in Abraham's case, Isaac was actually much older. He gave him totally to God, but Isaac watched his father all of his life live this life out. Abraham did not shield his child from hardship, sacrifice, or difficulty. And then we have Hannah. Produces baby Samuel. When he's weaned from the breast, he's given over to the priest to be raised around the things of God. You know what your kids need more than anything else? They need the influence of the church, other adults in church. And let me reiterate, and I'm going to add a little something to it. My conviction that once your child turns 18, they should be given over to the church to be discipled. They shouldn't be held on to and hovered over, and you're going to make sure nobody else has any input, any say to you get them where you want. Well, you can do that, but you're making the biggest mistake of your life. And if you're really bold, you'll let them loose before that. Don't worry, we're not going to infringe on your parenting. We are very careful about that. But once they're 18, you need to give your little gods over. So let me finish with, we need to sacrifice our altars. My children and now grandchild have all been raised with me being a pastor, living a pastor's busy life that revolves around church. They always went to public school, and they went to relatively demanding public schools where they really challenged them intellectually. There was a lot of homework involved. We never left them home from church, midweek, Sunday night, or in revivals. And part of it was, you know, obviously we didn't want to put in them that they can pick and choose it because they will when they're older. But we also wanted to teach them, you need to learn to sacrifice. I'm sacrificing for this thing, a lot of things. That means on Wednesdays, when you know it's church night, you're coming straight home, right to the books, all the way up till we leave for church. Right when church is over, you go straight home, back to the books. You may have to finish a little late, but you're learning how to sacrifice, so follow me. Revival weeks, they just understood that. That was their understanding, and that was the way they had to live. Right after church, back, finished. And this paid great dividends because they came of age. They both went to college. They both have college degrees. They both, during their college, stayed faithful to every service, not because we were hovering over them. Heavily involved in ministry while they were getting their degrees because they learned how to sacrifice and keep the things of God first. It was just the way they lived. So let me throw this out there. Some of you may resent me for doing this, but hey, it's there and I'm going to use it. So my daughter Marissa. So she did full-time college. She did the school where you do college and high school side by side, so there was always a pressure. But then she went to UTEP. During her full-time college, she got married during that time, and they got appointed door directors while she was still in college. So let's take it all the way back. During all this time, before marriage but in college, during marriage but in college, married, door director and in college, she was in song service, children's church, nursery, a band, Edge concessions, every Saturday outreach in Edge, every church service and revival. She's in Minnow's special music group and their youth leaders. Her grade point average was something like, I don't want to lie, it was up there. I know it was a pure A. Monday, she had song service practice. Tuesday was band practice. Wednesday was church. Thursday was off. Friday was youth study. Saturday was outreach in the morning, the Edge at night. And Sunday was church. And I marvel at that. And I'm not saying everyone has that ability. I marvel at that. But she learned how to sacrifice. She learned how to pay a price. She learned how to endure hardship. And she learned how to deal with demands on her time. And this is what we need to be trying to produce. Otherwise, things of God just kick to the curb. Oh, I'm in college, so I can't really do anything. Oh, you're still going to stick to your extracurricular. You're not going to give that up, I guarantee. But your ministry is going to go to the curb because you don't want to have to practice during the week. You've already made up your mind you can't do it. No, you don't want to do it. Because you can do it if you really try. And I realize everyone's threshold is different. I'm not saying you have to be that busy, but listen to me. Big mistake is and for you to actually encourage your kids. Now, mind you, if you're paying for it and they're flunking out, you might have to pull back a little bit. Don't take them completely out of ministry. That is a mistake. Okay, I've said a lot. I promised I'd give you time. The floor is all yours. We'll start with George, and then we're going to come all the way up here to Rosie.
Pastor, I've got experience family members and also in church, watching one of their sons grow up. And in church, I remember early on that he could do no wrong. I remember people would grab him as he's darting across the sanctuary, and they would grab him before he'd do something absolutely crazy, and the parents would get upset. I remember me being one of his uncles saying at a practice, he's just running amok in the back, and I grab him. I says, hey, in front of his parents and everything, but they were busy. So I thought I would do them a favor and stop him.
Mistake, right?
Well, that didn't end very well.
Yeah.
Jump years later, high school. Every coach was the bad coach. Every teacher was against him. Society, jobs, on and on. Now he's in the States care. He's been in the States care most of his life now. He's in prison, and still, he's such a talented young man. Yeah. He's so smart that people just don't understand him. No, he's a heroin addict, a junkie, and a spoiled brat. And it boggles my mind that they cannot get their head wrapped around the truth, nor do they want to hear it. And the whole family has suffered because of this idol. The whole family. Now, by the grace of God, we're believing God for him, but it's going to have to start early. Yeah. And I intended with my children, and they're not perfect. God help me. They're not perfect. I'm still got my little one, but I intend that they can be spoken to by anybody in this church or any adult within reason. Right. I will apply corporal punishment. Right. And when my kids have messed up, or when parents have come to me and say, hey, your kid hit, sometimes I look and say, I feel like my kid's getting a bad rap here. I may have a good, but you know what? I'm still going to deal with him because your name was brought up. Right or wrong, your name was brought up. You put yourself in that position.
Yeah, let me say this before Rosie goes. I am certainly not holier than thou here, folks. Made plenty of my own mistakes. I think the only saving grace for us is that we've been able to catch it quickly and turn it back and not let it become something that let preaching convict us, let other people's outside perspective deal with us. But we certainly are not holier than thou here. Just make sure we know that, okay?
Well, I was raised by my parents that we accept their rules and the regulations that they put for us. We weren't brought up with a lot of stuff. I raised my kids that way. But when I got divorced and I came back into town, I saw they were doing different with my nephew.
The way they raised him?
Yeah. They privileged him with everything. He had Xbox. He had all this stuff. And my kids go, well, why don't we have that? I go, because no. You're going to learn how to live in the world. What you earn is when you buy your stuff. I'm not going to be buying you all this stuff because that's what you want. And then I told my parents, I go, what happened? The way you raised me isn't the way you're raising him. And my parents were looking at me like, how dare you talk to me like that? Because you're raising us one way and you're raising him another way. Yeah, and it just shows that this has a generational ability to jump. So ones that one time actually raised their kids, and in this whole new philosophy, it's a whole culture. I'm telling you, it's a cultural thing that we have to push back on. We have to recognize it and see it for what it is. Sky.
I really appreciate this church. I really think new parents like myself, Ezekiel's only 2, but we have couples here who have raised kids. I mean, I'm one of them. And us as new parents here, you need to really get a hold and grasp couples and try to link hearts with them and pick at them. How did you do this? How did you do that? For example, my son and your grandson are 2 peas in a pod. They got the same mindset. So I learned early on.
You got to spank.
Yeah. Well, not just you got to, but on a larger spectrum of everything, you know, and especially depending on how your kid is. Young couples here, I encourage you, pick at the brains of those who raised kids and did a good job of it, and it'll be for the betterment of your parenting.
Yeah, we were given a paddle. Our girls were really young. It has Proverbs on it. Really nice paddle. And, I mean, we use that very well on our girls. And, boy, it's come in so handy with Zayden. I mean, he wears it out. But, you know, if you have the no thinking philosophy, please, you're tormenting the rest of the world. You get with it and start to discipline your child. Linda, and then we'll go over here to Adrian, and then we'll go over here.
Pastor, I believe also that the church, it's a great avenue for other couples, like Sky said, to help your children. The reason I'm saying this is because I have an older son, and I raised him. You know, I wasn't saved. I didn't know anything. And so he had everything you can imagine. I mean, even more than, you know. And you're like, okay, you want to give your kids the best of everything. But it's like, as time goes on, you know, I became a single mom. And it's like you try to give your kids, okay, well, you try to compensate for something that they don't have with gifts, with stuff. Yeah. And it's like, as he was growing older, I noticed that he was selfish. He wasn't saying thank you, and it's like I created a monster, because, you know, it's like we as parents don't realize how much we hurt our kids. We say we love them, but do we really love them? You know, so I remember with Uciel, he was barely a year older. He wasn't even born yet, Uciel. And so I said to God, you know, God, I know I'm not perfect, but when I got saved, I said, give me the opportunity that I did not have with my oldest to do with Uciel. So I think, you know, I ask God to, you know, to help me and you know, thank you for the people that has, you know, been in my son's life.
Amen. Best thing for single moms to do is get your boys involved with the men of the church. Adrian.
Yeah, I do appreciate this church and the culture we created in this church, you know, because it's been a church, it's been around for a while, so we cultivated that culture, you know, and I thank God for it. Also, there's a scripture you mentioned about Abraham, and makes me think of the law of first mention, like Pastor says, you know, law of first mention. You look back to the Bible, there's a reason why Abraham didn't tell his wife that he was going to go up to sacrifice his son.
That's good observation.
I just wanted to mention that in the Bible. There's a lot of revelation in the beginning.
Amen. Yeah, very nice. Go ahead.
I remember with AJ, I just, you know, I have family members that are not saved, and I've allowed him to miss church and thinking he's too little, not realizing. And I started seeing that his attitude was different, and I had to cut him back off my family, and it was really hard. But as we did that, we started. After I'm done praying, reading my Bible, I wake him up, get him ready. He starts praising, and I started noting the difference, and I realized, wow, he really can understand what God can do. And yeah. I've realized that I can take that away. Like, he loves to go outreaching. He loves to praise God, and he could be listening to a song in the car, and he'll be like, Mom, worship. Let's worship Jesus.
Yeah, do not, if you have kids in that age, do not mishandle that. Do not impose your secularism on them. Do not mishandle that. This is precious. Luis. Then Sandra, somebody over here.
This might not apply or give revelation to the older parents that have already raised, children, and you're on your second or third adult already. But for younger parents, one of the biggest things I've had to learn is you guys have already touched on it. I think even Pastor Warner touched on it. His revival is the order of the way who you love. When he preached that sermon about Lord, that all the 11 disciples said Lord, and Judas said, Rabbi. The biggest challenge for me has been that you got to love God above all things, including your wife and your child. And then your wife, and then your child. The secular world messes up on that. And that's why you were talking about so many divorces after the children leave. I've heard so many stories of, my parents waited till we were grown for them to get divorced. They just put up with each other. And it wasn't that. It was so much investment into the children that they never invested into their marriage. And the biggest thing that's going to challenge you as a parent growing up, and it's challenged me recently, is that I'm not my son's favorite person most of the time. I'm not my son's favorite person most of the time. I'm not the coolest. I'm not the nicest. I'm not the one they I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but it kills you as a parent because you want that from your children. You want that approval. You want that love. You want them to see you that way. And, but the biggest thing is praying. I've had to pray, God, give me revelation, give me understanding. Help me to know that what I'm doing is right in your eyes, not in my children's eyes, not because I seek their approval, not because I'm seeking their love, and even in issues with my wife, because one of the greatest issues you'll have in your marriage is disagreements on how to go about disciplining and raising your children.
You said a lot there, brother. You said a lot. Sandra, and then somebody go over to Richard, and then I'll have time for one more after that. We'll stop with Valerie.
I work with kids from 0 to 3, and a lot of the parents are low income, and they get to go to parenting classes and different things that they offer the society. And parenting classes are teaching parents now never to say no to them. That you should, if they're doing something you don't want them to do, you should turn it around to, if you do that, then this will happen. You don't say, no, don't stand on the edge of the cliff, whatever, if everything. And so I have this one client that I see, and she had characteristics of autism the first time we saw her, but it's because she's uncontrollable. Yeah. And the first time I went to see her, her parents told, I would say no. I said, no, don't do that. Don't hit me with that. Don't throw that at me. Yeah. And she said, immediately the mother said, we have never said no to her. And it all made sense, Yeah. And it's amazing how many people are like that.
Yeah, I ask myself, how would you non-spanking timeout parents deal with my grandson? The only thing he understands is when my male authoritative voice rises. And then when that doesn't do it, the other day he got in trouble for the second time from the teacher. So I told him, you come home in trouble with the teacher, you're getting a swat. And the swat's going to hurt. Now, if you see me with my grandson, I love him to death. He's with me all the time. We play, we do stuff, but when it comes down to it, you got to be thinking the future here. Richard.
Pastor, I just wanted to mention about authority. Some of us got an opportunity to visit the prison system when it was a prison system. And back then, you knew about authority. Authority will teach you when to be quiet, when to talk. It will teach you to listen. It will teach you to observe. And all of this comes under because you're not the boss. You cannot run the prison. You are in the prison. You are a prisoner. Now, I don't want your kids to be prisoners, right? Yeah. But, what I'm trying to say is that back then you couldn't just do whatever it is you wanted to do. There were consequences. That's what I wanted to mention to parents. Authority is going to help your children, and if you can get them in any type of ministries here with some of these guys that are lovable fuzzballs like Pastor, it'll help them so much, because this is what I see. We have a lot of males here, a lot of guys here that have authority, and it'll just help so much.
Amen. And we will finish with Valerie.
I just wanted to say that everything you've said, obviously it's very convicting, but I would say most of all it's very convicting because I have her, and all the rules that you just said, it applies. You know, it doesn't matter whether they have special needs or not. They know what they're doing. And I think Juan has really pushed that where I have to be submissive and listen and just let it be. And it has brought her to be where she's at today, you know. Wow. Just even something as simple as potty training. You know, she's potty trained, and, you know, I know that it doesn't work in every situation, but I know that if we didn't push for that, you know, everything you said just applies to kids with special needs as well.
Yeah,
so thank you
for that. Thank you very much. All right, well, that's all I have time for. We'll start service in a few moments.